in areas that you're not looking for a door to open, but if you have curiosity and some courage, you step through that door, and sometimes marvelous things happen.
Welcome to 10-Minute Travels. With me, as always, is Phil Freeman.
And with me, as always, is Shane Patrick. And we have with us Charles Fleming, adventurer, journalist, motorcyclist. And if you want to learn anything more about 10-Minute Travels or what we do, check out 10minutetravels.com.
Let's get right to it, shall we?
And I only end up at the Herald Examiner, at the Los Angeles Times as a full-time person, by mere chance. You and I, Phil, had talked the other day about the doors that open in areas that you're not looking for a door to open, but if you have curiosity and some courage, you step through that door, and sometimes marvelous things happen. And that was the way with the Los Angeles Times. Someone called me and they said, we've been trying to fill this position for the longest time. It's an important position, but we can't find the right candidate. And I said, well, I haven't done that kind of work for a long time, but if you give me a couple of days, I'm sure I can come up with 3 or 4 really good candidates for that job. And they laughed and said, well, no, you're the candidate. We're actually talking about you. And I thought, well, they're never going to hire me for that job, but I'll go and meet with them because these are people that I know a little bit and I'm interested in. So I met with them and I knew they weren't going to hire me. And they asked me to come back again and I knew they weren't going to hire me. And they asked me to come back again. And finally I was interviewing with the managing editor and he said, I don't understand this. I look at your books. I look at your background. Why would a guy like you want to come work here to do a job like this? And I said, well, I don't know that I do. And he gasped and said, what do you mean? And I said, well, that's what we're doing here, isn't it? You're interviewing me and I'm kind of interviewing you and we're trying to figure out if we're right for each other. And he started laughing and he said, I've interviewed hundreds of people for jobs. No one has ever said that. You're hired. So I went to work for them and, running an entertainment industry division. But here's the door that opens. I really didn't like that. And it was hard work. I didn't enjoy the people I was working with. So when an opportunity came to promote someone into getting a column back for covering motorcycles, because I thought Los Angeles is an important industry spot for motorcycles. It's like the most important market. Many of the companies have their U.S. headquarters here. So I pitched them hard on this. They said yes. I took it to the woman who had been doing that job. She said, that's great news, but I just took a job with another newspaper. So I went back to the people who were going to run the column. And I said, no go, she doesn't want to do it. And they said, well, what about you? And I had never thought of myself as a motorcycle journalist or motorcycle writer. I never had any ambition to write about those things. I was just a guy that loved riding motorcycles. But that door swung open and I thought, well, okay, why not? I'll step through it. And it ended up being, that became a new full-time job doing that and covering automobiles and being the reviewer for automobiles. So I was riding all the motorcycles that I wanted, and I was also driving the fastest cars on the planet, the most expensive cars on the planet, and all because, a door sort of inched open a little bit, and I thought, well, I don't know, maybe so. Go take a look. Which is how everything good, it seems like, has happened in my life. I have my plan, and I'm going that direction, and I'm going fast, and I'm going hard. And then something taps me on the shoulder over here and says, hey, look at this, though. And that ends up the direction that I'm going. And I completely forget which direction I was going in the first place, which is how, ultimately that's how you and I met, because I started doing motorcycle travel and then motorcycle travel writing. And suddenly that's the career I have is I'm writing about motorcycles full time and especially motorcycle travel. What could be better?
When you look back on your articles, what's your favorite thing to cover? What gets you going when you know you got something on the horizon?
Well, sometimes it's a secret that no one knows that gets me excited. For example, I know a guy. How can I tell this story without blowing the story?
Oh, it's okay. We can make news. No one listens to this anyway.
I know a guy who bought a house in a neighborhood, and he found out that Steve McQueen used to live in that neighborhood, and he ends up meeting the woman who owns the house that Steve McQueen used to live in, and he talks to her about how magnificent that must be to live in a house. And she says, well, yeah, but we've got all this crap in the backyard that we can't get rid of. And he said, what kind of crap? She said, oh, you should come look. It's, I don't know what they are, German cars, Italian cars. And it turns out that in the backyard, there's all these rusting Porsches and a Lamborghini and some motorcycle frames. So I haven't really jumped into this yet, but that gets me excited. Like, what an amazing treasure trove of weirdness and history that Steve McQueen cars are rotting in the backyard under a bunch of trees in a hillside home in Laurel Canyon that he lived in the 1970s. What? So that's fascinating. And otherwise, it's just, I'm going to go to Hokkaido, where I've never been. I'm going to ride motorcycles there with people I've never met. And we're going to go and see things that I've never seen. And somebody's going to pay me some money to do this? Are you kidding? That's the jackpot. And so I've done that in Mexico and in Colombia and in Iceland and in Alaska and Italy and England. I mean, it's a boy's dream come true. I mean, I started riding motorcycles when I was about 10. And if anybody told me, oh yeah, at 70, you'll still be riding dirt bikes, you'll still be doing long distance travel, you'll still be going to countries you've never been in and riding and having adventures that you never otherwise would have had, I would have said, oh, I don't think so. That's too good to be true. That can't possibly be true.
Now, of the books you've written, what's your favorite? What are you most proud of, or the one that really tipped it over for you? You're really glad that you went down that road.
I'm glad that I wrote all of them. The first one was the hardest one to do. It's a book called High Concept, and it was a biography of Hollywood in the 1980s, based around the life and death of a very high-flying, super powerful, self-destructive film producer named Don Simpson. He and his partner, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, made a lot of the movies from the 80s that everyone knows: Beverly Hills Cop and Flashdance and Top Gun and Days of Thunder and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he was a super high-flying guy and super, super destructive guy. And when he died, I was asked to write the biography, and I did. That became my first book. And it was a very dark, very hard, really putting myself in a lot of extremely sketchy places with a lot of extremely sketchy people. He had a very dark side, a deep dark side that had to do with drugs and alcohol and prostitutes and gambling. And it was a really hard book to do. And it really beat me to death. And it ended up being a really good book. And it's still, to this day, it's a very admired book. It always goes on I shouldn't say always, it's often on the list of, like, here, the best 5 books ever written about the Hollywood movie industry. So I'm really proud of it. I'm just as proud in a different way. I was approached some years ago to follow up on a radio story that had been produced about the doctor who had been the principal enthusiast for ice pick lobotomies in the United States. He had introduced the thing here. He had done more than anyone else. He had wound up completely disgraced. No doctors would allow him into their hospitals anymore. Everyone understood that this process of the lobotomy, while it might have been relieving and effective on very, very few occasions, mostly turned people into vegetables and destroyed them. And it happens that I was asked to tell the story of one of the last patients he ever worked on, and one of the youngest patients he ever worked on, a San Jose boy named Howard Dully, whose wicked, very, very wicked stepmother had introduced him to this doctor when he was 12 and put him through an ice pick lobotomy. And I met him late in his life, after he had almost died from other health problems, and he had decided at about age 50, after he'd had a massive heart attack, that if he didn't die, he was going to go find out, what did they do to me? Because he knew he had had an operation. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know why it had been done. He didn't know if that's why his life was so messed up, or was he just a jerk who couldn't do things right? So telling his story and establishing for his family and for him and for anyone who cared what barbarism had been visited upon him and how heroically he had managed to have a life despite that, was a vastly satisfying piece of work. That book is called My Lobotomy. It's absolutely heartbreaking and also super inspiring, because this is a real story of overcoming and a real story of survival. And he became a close friend and died last year, alas. But it's a really good. It's one of two things, and we already talked a little bit about the other one. It's one of the two things that I think it's a really good thing that I came along, because that book is an important book that needed to be out there and his story needed to be told. And I just feel like what a great piece of luck that I happened to stumble into it and got to participate in bringing a story like that out. Not especially because it was good for me or my career or, shines my apple at all, but just because it's a good thing for the world to have that book there.
That was Charles Fleming, journalist, adventurer, walker. And if you want to learn anything else about 10-Minute Travels or whatever we do, check out 10minutetravels.com.
And we want to remind you to make sure your sense of humor matches your sense of adventure. And please like, subscribe, and share this podcast on all the platforms.